The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Do you spend tons of hours hunched over a table building and painting models? Maybe you're up late at night reading about all the Warhammer 40K lore. Whatever your optical needs, Serious Readers has got you covered. They produce amazing, high-quality HD lighting which simulates daylight indoors. It's amazing for painting or reading, and it's recommended by over 500 opticians. You can use discount code AOW to save £100 on any HD light. That's over $100. Visiting landing page seriousreaders.com/AOW. That's seriousreaders.com/AOW. With the discount code AOW, there's a link below in the description of the podcast episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. This week, we are joined by a return guest, an all-around superstar, one of my great friends, and an excellent coach on the Art of War team, Jack the Snacks Harpster. Jack, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good, Nick. Thank you for having me on the podcast. We're waiting with bated breath to see who the Claw would snag to be on the podcast after this last event, and it was me.
The Claws always be snagging. Thank you so much for coming on. We are honored to have you, and I'm sure people are going to be really excited to see what list you have cooked up and done well with this time. It's been a while since we've had you on. Last time, I believe, was you talking about your Lord of Skulls and how much fun you had playing with that one. And I think this list has got you even more excited somehow. So we're going to be unpacking that.
I certainly had a good time over the last weekend. So, yeah, very excited about this list.
Awesome. So basically, this is part one of a two-part show, everybody. In part one of the show, Jack and I are going to talk about his event. This was actually a team tournament in which Jack handled all of the pairings. So we're going to look about what that was. We're going to talk about his really cool army that he designed for the event and how it played. It is Harlequins and Eldari and all kinds of good stuff you do not typically see. And it's put together and played really, really excitingly. So that's what part one is going to be. But then part two is where we get to learn how it actually plays on the table. You know, what were the moves he's making? How is he actually doing it? So if you're interested in the micro level strategy, the positioning, the tactics, the play-by-play of the games of the team tournament, please check out part two. You can subscribe on our Patreon. That is patreon.com/AOW40K. It's $5 a month, gets you access to this part two, along with 240 plus other episodes and access to our amazing Discord server, in which Jack is a member and will happily chat with you about your questions as well. So, Jack, are you ready?
I am.
Awesome.
So you want me to walk you through what I was playing with?
Well, yeah, we can start there. Why don't you tell us about the army list you took to the event?
Absolutely. So I decided to submit Eldar. Actually, I wanted to originally play Harlequins because I really liked my Harlequins from the end of 9th edition. And unfortunately, I just couldn't make them work in a way that I was happy about, but I still wanted to keep in a big unit of 12 Harlequins with the Visarch and Yvraine, because I thought that unit at least was super cool. So then I wanted to see where I could go from there. Now, I didn't come up with, I think, any of the parts of the list, any of the individual like combos of the list, I didn't come up with, but putting them all together, that was kind of my thing. So unit of 12 troops with the Visarch and Yvraine. It fights first. It has good amounts of damage in kind of weird ways. It has fusion pistols that'll reroll a hit and a wound. The two characters in combat hit decently hard. Yvraine's gun is like wild. I don't know why it's anti-infantry 2+ devastating wounds, but it is. It certainly is. So you can kind of chip people down in shooting and then get them in combat. The characters hit really hard with the units. The unit gives them +1 to wound. And if you need quantity of attacks, the unit has like 49 attacks coming out of it before you even get to the characters. After that, the second unit I wanted to put in was a Wind Rider unit. So this was Quentin's idea from a fair bit back, was taking a unit of Wind Rider jet bikes with Shuriken cannons, and you put a Farseer in there on bike, and you put a Warlock on bike in there. And the Farseer on bike has the Weeping Stones, and the Weeping Stones give you a fate die for every unit you kill with them. And then the Warlock gives them ignores cover, and the two characters together have not inconsequential shooting, right? 2 Singing Spears, an Eldritch Storm, Destructor, which is basically a heavy flamer, two twin Shuriken catapults, and then a bunch of Shuriken cannons. That unit's really good for poking out, shooting, and poking back, which I think is really helpful. It's a good fire and fade unit. It proved very useful over the event, and also it gets you a bunch of fate dice. Something I've noticed for Eldar players is that they only have 6, right? They only have 6 fate die. They're very stingy with them. They barely ever use them. When they use them, are really powerful, but they don't use them that often. And I wanted to use more than that. I wanted to play, sisters, but what if they moved 24 inches and then shot you? That sounds better, right? Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting, Jack. We got a giant unit of jet bikes with Farseer and a Warlock moving around, fire and fading. And like you said, the Farseer and the Warlock add a lot of firepower to it. It's like not inconsequential. Eldritch Storm, 2 more catapults, 2 spears. It adds up very quickly. And, having a lot of fate dice, which are just automatically 6s, really lets you push people around. But we'll get into all that. Let's finish going through the list top to bottom.
So then I have a unit of Guardian Defenders that's going to stand on my home objective, screen me out, poke a cheeky Bright Lance, even, with a reroll, a hit, and a wound, and give me a fate die every turn. So again, really get into that fate die dynamic. Then we got a bunch of random characters. We got the Autarch Wayleaper, who's really good. He's got the Phoenix Gem. We've got the Avatar of Khaine, who was really, really good, completed kind of the trifecta of big units, and really helped cover for the weaknesses that the other 2 had with a lot of like high toughness units or vehicles or hulls or monsters or stuff like that. So he would really help in those scenarios. Then I have the Death Jester with Fate's Messenger, a Farseer on foot, and that rounds out my characters. And then I have a unit of Shadow Specters, unit of Swooping Hawks, and 3 squads of Warp Spiders to round out the list.
So that's really exciting. You basically have 3 main components to your list. You've got the big unit of jet bikes with the Farseer and your Warlock. You've got the big unit of Harlequin troops with Ivrain and Vizark. And then you've got the Big Daddy Avatar, who's just a machine using the fate dice for 6s for Overwatch, 6s for autosaves. And then beyond that, you have your standard awesome MSU package of Hawks and Spiders to play the mission and skirmish with small things really, really effectively. Is that the basic idea?
That's the basic idea. A lot of the time, the Warp Spiders ended up kind of being the 4th unit, in that they would kind of move as a Warp Spider squad of 15 models. And that ended up being really strong, but that kind of comes down to how it plays on the table.
Right, which we'll get into really shortly, but I think that's really cool. You almost had a 4th little Death Star there, and the Hawks were just doing your mission skirmish play. When I look at Eldar list, they really have deviated a lot since the last balance stage slate and what you could take, but typically they're more MSU-based, multiple small units. They got lots of little cheap, 80 to 100 point aspect warrior units that are just awesome, running around doing way too many things. And then they're getting more and more MSU, and sometimes you might see the Avatar, you might not. Incarn, you might not. And there's D-cannons, they're very popular as well. Warwalkers are very popular. Hornets are, and I'm just not seeing those choices here. I rarely see this jet bike unit with the Farseer Warlock. I know Quentin ran it once or twice, but it's far from meta. And then the Harlequin unit with the Vrain Vizark I've seen it, it's popular, but it's not very common, and it's kind of unique. And then the Avatar is like a do you do it or do you don't do it type unit. How do you put them all together? How does this work as an army?
So the army generally has 2 modes. One is I have a decent amount of units that can sit back, not be answered, and pick away at my opponent, right? I have the jet bikes fire and fading. I have the Death Jester, who is a rock star this event, just standing back and just peppering my opponent with shots. And you can't answer him.
Can you explain what that guy does real quick? Sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure everyone understands how vicious this thing is.
Absolutely. Yeah, the DJ was amazing. So the Death Jester has Fate's Messenger, which means he can flip a die either to hit or wound to a 6 or save. All of those are relevant. Each turn, your turn and your opponent's. In your shooting phase, he can pick an ability for that phase. I think you pick lethal hits, although there's no reason you'd ever do that. And then there's precision or sustained hits 3. So you generally pick sustained hits 3 unless you're going after a character, although he can do a lot of different things. You roll your 3 shots. If you decide you want to use a fate die on this interaction, you can use your Eldar reroll and then sub in a fate die for a 6, then flip a die to a 6. And that's at minimum, if you do that, that is a minimum of 9 hits. If you roll a 6 in there, which is about 50-50, if you roll a 6 on any of the 3 dice, that is 12 hits.
Holy crap. This is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it's great.
And you were saying like your list generates more fate dice because you have that jetbike unit, but yeah, we'll get into that.
Yep, and the getting the one every turn off of the Guardians was also super huge. And then he would shoot your opponent, and he would be Strength 6, AP 1, Damage 2, devastating wounds. So a lot of the time he would just be like, all right, 12 hits. Oh, look, I rolled 3 6s to wound. That's 6 damage. Take 4 saves. My opponent would fail a couple saves, and that's a squad gone. That's a vehicle dead, whatever. There's a second mode where when you shoot him, a lot of the time the jetbike unit has left something low that I need to kill, right? I have to kill it because it's on the center objective. I don't want them to get a 15. So if the jetbike unit doesn't finish something off, which happens, it's a bunch of strength 6 guns, like it should kill things, but it might not. If the jetbike unit leaves something low, you can shoot, and instead of using any of your flips on the hits, you can use them on the wounds and guarantee that you do 4 damage in dev wounds by flipping a wound roll to a 6 and using your Eldar reroll into a fate die of a 6. And just go, that thing is guaranteed 100% dead just by pointing my gun at it.
Yeah, that's super powerful. And it's a great finisher to like what you said, the jetbikes who leave units finished off. And they're firing fading while this is happening. So this is a lot of uninteractable firepower, right? That jetbikes basically are getting shot, and this dude's just blown up.
Absolutely. There's a third mode even, which is he can get precision instead of sustained hits, and then you can just guarantee 4 mortal wounds to a character, which I never got a chance to do, but he did single-handedly hold off a Wraithguard brick.
That's crazy.
Yeah, because if the guy moved out his Spirit Seer at all, I just go, he's dead.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just bye-bye.
Okay, so that's the Death Jester. What else we got in here?
So I had the jet bikes popping out, shoot, pop back. I had the Death Jester who could stand in the open and shoot without getting shot back. And then I had the Shadow Specters that could poke out, shoot, and pop back. And between all of that, that is a not inconsequential amount of firepower going at something. Usually just like you push something on the center, cool, I'm going to kill it and pass the turn back to you, and you can't do anything. And like, it's not going to table someone doing that, but it is going to get them to walk into a tabling if they attempt to overcompensate by putting too many things in the center.
It requires an amount of respect, right? You can't just walk your army in the open against that amount of firepower, just take it to the face and not interact with it at all and have that be okay. And certainly not time after time after again. So it kind of it puts you in this territory where your opponent has to hop from terrain piece to terrain piece to kind of deal with you and try to chase you down. It's pretty nice having that kind of not indirect fire, but fire that can't be shot back, basically.
Absolutely. It gets people to come forward. It can peel key resources that I don't want to have to deal with. And it was just a really good package to have, honestly. The Shadow Specters kind of just felt like they were there. They didn't feel that great. They would probably get replaced.
1 5-man?
Yeah, just 1 5-man didn't feel that awesome. But the Jet Bikes plus the Death Jester felt really good as a combination.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. The Shadow Specters I've also found a little underwhelming, but that makes sense that you found the one squad similarly so.
Yeah, I suppose if I had room for 2 or 3 squads, I'd feel a lot better about each individual squad kind of being a battery. But just the one squad felt like, they were like, oh, yeah, I contributed 2 guys, and everyone's just looking at them side-eye.
Yeah, right. Well, every now and then it's like you do 6 damage, and it's like, hey, and then the next 4 turns you do nothing.
Yeah, they weren't ever that great. They were pretty decent into World Eaters. That was about it.
Cool. So what is the Avatar's job in this? And he's just like holding primary or holding the center. Like, how are you playing him?
So he does not go down the middle at your opponent. What he does is he kind of, whatever side the jet bikes or whatever aren't really covering, he'll go like up to my natural expansion, up towards, up near to the objective that is above my deployment zone. And he's a lot more mobile than people think he is because he can move 10 and he can shoot something to death, and then he can charge at +1 with a fate die. He's actually guaranteed to charge you if he's within 18 of you. So that and over that, I'm willing to take like a 2-up or a 3-up, right, on 1 die sometimes, depending on what the board state looks like. So what he usually does is he kind of moves up behind a wall partway up the board and waits to catch my opponent running onto me. And once he does that, he can do some horrific damage. anytime I can get him into the action without enough of a crackback from my opponent that he will die, I'm willing to do it. And that's basically all it is. Like, he opens things up pretty hardcore because he's able to go in and just start scooping vehicles left and right. My round 1 was into guard, and he killed 4 Leman Russes and 2 Sentinels over the course of that game.
He's so good into that kind of army, right? Where like they struggle to deal with him effectively, and he's just got like shooting on Overwatch, shooting in the shooting phase, awesome combat, ripping them up, no impulse.
Yeah, and the Overwatch off this army is also pretty nasty because, as you said, the Avatar's Overwatch is I will flip the die to a 6, make it Overwatch, make it hit, and then it's D3 additional with a wound reroll, and it's really high quality shooting. And oh, by the way, your vehicle's dead. So
right, like he's literally got a melt a gun, but it's like D6 plus 2, and his sustain hits D3. So it's 1 plus D3 hits on the Overwatch is crazy.
Yeah, there's plenty of times where I would just like look at 3 vehicles and none of them would move, and that gives my very fragile elf bodies a lot of latitude if they're not going to move. Him plus the Harlequins were really good for controlling space and giving myself that space to jump on my opponent and know, hey, this one position, they can't hit it back next turn. So I can put my warp spiders there, shoot him. And then on the following turn, I know I still have 15 warp spiders left, right? And then
so there's a lot to unpack there. How do you, like, let's first break it down with the Harlequin, break them all and introduce these warp spiders. What is the Harlequin brick doing with the Avatar? Like, they just holding hands as like 2 units that hang out near each other as they conquer the side objective?
They can do that, for sure. They did do that in a couple of games. They are tough and do damage in a way the Avatar doesn't. So the Avatar has really, really high quality wounds in the sense that they're high toughness, -1 to wound, good armor save. But like, it's vulnerable to mortals. It's vulnerable to being swarmed, right? Because you have the sweeps, but you're not really great at chewing through, like, I don't know, like Necron Warriors, right? Or which was a pairing that actually mattered. Or like Green Tide, you're not good at killing that. Whereas the Harlequins are very good at killing that sort of thing. And they give me a second unit that is pretty durable in that they just have 12 bodies. I can, if needed, make them -1 to hit and -1 to wound. They have a 4-up invuln. They have a 5-up feel no pain. They regen models. The first 8 models basically don't matter, so you haven't really hurt the unit until you get down to the characters. But if I need to kill a horde, they'll run in and they will kill that horde. They're also really good into melee armies because they fight first. So if you charge me, I'm going to take a pound of flesh off you before you hit me. So it's kind of like stacking defenses. If I kill half your unit, it's kind of like -1 damage if you're 2 damage, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. If they fights first is a hell of a rule into a combat army. Like, it is just like cheating sometimes. And then I love the way you're describing it, right? Like, it's basically a complement of the Avatar. The things that kill him are like the Death Guard grenade stratagems, weird mortal timings, like stuff, one really high quality melted shot, something like that. I literally kill the Avatar with grenades over the course of 3 turns when I play Sisters. And trying that against Harlequins is like not going to get me anywhere quickly. And they, really don't care about my multi-meltas. And they're good at picking up lots of Sisters' bodies where I'm putting the Avatar in jail. But that can be extrapolated across like every army. You brought up Necrons and Green Tide and things like that. That's really cool. How do you keeping them alive though? Like, they're a bunch of toughness 3 Harlequins on foot,
So they're more durable than they look. They have a feel no pain. There's a lot of them. They have a 4-up invuln. I can make them -1 to hit. And if they're the one in danger, I'll give them -1 to wound. And suddenly, like a bunch of strength 4 attacks aren't really going to do it if they're -1 to hit, -1 to wound, 4-up invuln, 5-up feel no pain. So they're harder to kill than they look like they are. They're definitely easier to kill than the Avatar, for sure. But they give me a second unit that is durable and can make space on the board, which the Avatar can't do because he can't be in 2 places. In addition, they do something else the Avatar can't do, which is just physically be wide. We'll get into this when we talk about the I played a game into World Eaters.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
that matchup for sure.
Massive part of that game and significant in other games was I can just spread the unit out. And that is, like, the Avatar is like a 60 mil base or some nonsense like that. Maybe an 80 mil, I'm not really sure, but he's 1 base. Whereas a 12-man Harlequin unit with 2 characters strung out in a giant ring with my entire squishy army behind it is something that you just can't really do with anything else.
Jack, I'm so excited to hear how you're manipulating the coherency of this unit in part 2 about how you pulled that off in the games, because that's what part 2 is all about, right? Like the actual positioning of the models and the tactics, and very rarely do we have guests come on and talk about this is a unit of 12 individual models. That's part of its value. That's so cool, and I'm really excited about that. But talk to me about the usage on the table a little bit more. The Harlequins and the Avatar, you're talking about how they're 2 units that are used to create space. In some matchups, you have to hold hands to the other side, to the side objective. But in other games, do they spread out? What's that look like? One takes the center, one takes the flank?
So that definitely happened in my last game, where I looked at his army and I said, all right, I'm going to hit you this turn, and you have the bandwidth to either try to kill the Avatar or try to kill the Harlequins. So here's both. And he went after the Avatar, almost killed it, didn't. But the Harlequins were in the center of the board and got left completely untouched, because if he didn't kill the Avatar was about to bowling ball through his army, so he focused that down. And he can't just charge the Harlequins away because it was CSM. He had 5-man noise marine squads. If they charge in, I'm going to mulch them. Wow. So, or they even get to swing. So it's all right, he had 3 Forge Fiends. I said, all right, they can either go into this unit, which it'll hurt. You'll probably kill the unit or get pretty close, but the Avatar's going to be at full wounds and you're going to not be in a second. So he took the swing on the Avatar, left the unit completely alive. And knowing when you have the ability to put both out and they can't answer both means one of them just gets to start rolling on your opponent and gets to hold space. If they can deal with both, they can support each other. The Harlequins can threaten to heroically intervene, which with fights first really sucks for your opponent sometimes. For example, if your opponent is World Leaders and they have, this didn't come up because this wasn't the build my opponent was playing, but if they're World Leaders and they have the Master of Executions that's going to try and kill the Avatar or whatever, if you just position the Harlequins nearby, sorry, you can't. Because if you charge in, I'm going to heroic in and I'm going to precision your character out, and then you won't get to do anything you want to do. Or I'll just kill the unit because they're very good at killing Marines.
This sounds like it's a very technically challenging list to play. I know you're an expert of the combat phase, having played World Leaders and Blood Angels, and you do your coaching and all that stuff. But, if someone who's maybe not a master of the combat phase be able to wield this kind of army, or is this very much like an expert level list?
I definitely think it is one that gets a lot of value out of playing it well because you have a lot of options to go with. But I think you can do well. With it, even if you're not a master of the combat phase. It's got some durable units, got some units that hit hard, and you'll learn to use those options as you play with it more.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. So when you're looking at this army, it seems super dynamic, right? Like you're obviously going to change your strategy and approach based on the game that you're playing. How are you approaching your secondaries and primaries with this? Like it's hard for Eldar in general to successfully hold primary outside of contesting their opponents. And then secondaries, what's your strategy for it?
Oh, good reminder. The Harlequin unit is very good at holding that primary as well.
Well, yeah, I figured that's part of your answer.
Bingo. That and the Avatar, and also lone operatives, of which I have two, the Autarch and the Death Jester. Between all that, I did not have any problems holding primary. Because if the Avatar is behind a wall near my expansion objective, and I've got, the Autarch on it, where you can walk out, maybe shoot him, maybe not, depending on how my Phantasm goes, because I was willing to aggressively Phantasm. Like to do it even when I needed a 3-up or a 4-up or something. And if that's the case, right, if the Avatar's right next to it and you could walk up and shoot my Autarch, but it's only going to take the first life off him, you're never going to do it. And so I get to hold the objective forever. Or if I've got like Warp Spiders or Swooping Hawks or something behind a wall on the objective, but there's a 12-man Harlequin unit just behind them, you can't really push them without walking onto the Harlequins or walking onto the Avatar that's protecting it. Right. Or if the Harlequins are on the objective, you might just not be able to charge it at all, and it is 14 OC. So, like, if it's behind a wall on an objective, guess what? It's just my objective.
Yeah, that's very fair. And, like, objectives in the open, you still have lone ops and you have the Avatar, and it's hard for everybody if the objective's in the open. So that's very valid. What about secondaries?
Well, there's also on primary, there's an element of I'm willing to hit my opponent as they come in to steal my objective away. So
What do you
like,
mean by that? Like,
so as my opponent pushes in at me, I'm willing to just take my army and jump them, which means they never really get to my objective. They get halfway to my objective, and then I've jumped them. Then we're fighting on their side of the board.
So like, basically, you're kind of, we talk about where the battle takes place, right? Two armies are hitting each other in close combat. It could be in the middle of the board or on one person's side. And if it's on someone's side, they're fighting back for their objectives while your opponent is taking their objectives. And the person who's losing this is not really making plays for your opponent's side. So is that kind of the idea, is to shift the focus of where the battle is taking place onto your opponent's side quickly so they're not even concerned with contesting your primary?
It's basically that there's two ways a game can go. They push in with a little bit towards your objective, and then my non-responsive shooting, right? My Wind Riders and the Death Jester and whatnot are going to shoot them and try and pick that threat up before it gets to hit me. And then my objective is protected with big, beefy boys. Or
I see. Yeah, okay.
They push in with enough that it's valuable and worth hitting, so then I jump on them. And at that point, I try to just zone clear and just like literally kill everything in that quadrant of the board, and then there's nothing to take my objective.
Do you welcome the control matches where basically neither player is doing anything but you're fire and fading the jet bikes, and that's slowly but surely causing a winning board state?
Yes, and also I have two very good lone ops that'll win the lone op fight. Like if you have a Calexis or whatever, or Calidus, I'll win the lone op fight with you, right? So that means my lone ops will beat your lone ops, or my warp spiders will run over and assassinate your lone op and then peace out before at the end of the shooting phase, before you can do anything. And so that means I'll be able to shoot you off the objectives. You won't necessarily be able to shoot me off the objectives. And also all my threatening units are these tiny little units that are, the footprint the size of, I don't know, a checkers piece. And it's very easy to like wedge these little 5-man units of warp spiders around the board in places your opponent can't get to. And that means that, it's easy for me to pick away these larger units and position myself in a good place where I can be proactive if they start to try to shift the setting of the board. I have these non-responsive units I'll poke out and shoot and poke back, and I have lone ops. Now, my list, I think, I've not played it. I think it is probably quite weak to good indirect shooting. There's not a ton of that in the meta right now, and it's a teams event, so I get to avoid that when it exists.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to the whole next line of questioning, which is actually like, what is this list's purpose within the team setting? Like, obviously in singles, we kind of just talked about one of its weaknesses is indirect fire. But even then, you have lone ops, so you're not like totally screwed if they're all in on it. It's really like if they have like just a couple basilisks or something to threaten your bikes effectively or whatever.
Yeah, the bikes would be the ones to feel it. The Harlequins are actually pretty good into indirect fire because they heal D3 guys a turn. Like if you're shooting that, it's a black hole of damage. You'll eventually kill it, but like you're not killing anything else. So the lone ops, the Avatar, and the Harlequins are just totally fine into indirect fire, but everything else is just going to get shot. And
how is your anti-tank with this, just in general? I feel like you're leaning really heavy on the Avatar here.
The anti-tank felt fine. It felt very adequate. Round one, I did play into a guard matchup where he had 7 Leman Russes, 2 Chimeras, 2 Hellhounds, and 3 Scout Sentinels, and I tabled him by turn 4, I believe. So that
seems pretty good.
The output of the list was never the issue, to be honest with you. The entire ethos of the army is the damage doesn't look that high, but that's because you're used to evaluating the damage of an army through the lens of like, I'm not going to get to apply all of it to my opponent all at once. Whereas with this, when you are going aggro, your units are so fast that you are getting to 100% activate every single gun and ability in your army and every single rule and everything at your opponent. And in that case, it is going to sting very hard. And oftentimes, if you can cut the angles just right and set up the move, not really the move blocks, but set up like, I'm going to kill the things that can hit my vulnerable positions back. If you set all that up properly, they're not going to be able to respond to you after you've hit them properly. right? They'll respond to the front leading elements like the Avatar or the Harlequins, but they won't get to, the characters that are doing a ton of damage, or the warp spiders are doing a ton of damage, or any of the aspect warriors or anything. They won't get to any of that.
So if I'm to understand this right, you play this non-interactive game, chilling for like a couple turns. You move your Avatar, your Harlequin unit, whichever makes sense, or both, to the expansion objective, or right off the expansion objective and put some lone ops there, depending on how your opponent can respond to it. And then as they kind of move up into midfield, you just move 24 inches with the warp spiders, send the Hawks forward, send the Avatar forward, use the Fate die to charge something, lone ops, move, advance, shoot, move very fast. Like everybody all ins this thing. And you don't all in just everywhere in your opponent's army. You pick a small section of your opponent's army and you just sort of like, this is dead now. And what you remain alive can retaliate because you're very aggressive with it, but they're going to get stuck fighting your Avatar and your Harlequin troops, which are naturally at the front because they were in combat. They charged. And then your warp spiders and your hawks and your characters are like carefully, methodically placed so that when this whole game state is ended up with your Avatar and your Harlequin troops up front, these guys are safe from whatever your opponent will have left as long as your turn went according to plan.
Exactly. Yeah, I basically treated it as like I was zone clearing. I would pick...
That's a good word for it, yeah.
I would pick a section of my opponent's army, and it trust me, it is not necessarily a small portion of my opponent's army. And I would just say, all right, I basically draw like a box around it and say everything in this box is going to die. And that means that there's no random bolters shooting back at my warp spiders. There's nothing going on there. It's just everything in this section of the board is going to die. And the nice part about warp spiders and other Eldar units generally is they are so fast that they can access everything in that box I've set up, right? So it's like Inceptors almost, where when I want to clear an area, oftentimes there's going to be units towards the back of that area or behind walls that I don't get to access, and then they get to pop out and hit me back. But because warp spiders are so ungodly fast, and the jet bikes are very fast, and the Avatar can charge really long distances reliably, and also Phantasm on the Harlequins is kind of like Advance and Charge if you think about it. And then you can auto bang the charge with +1 off the Avatar. I can get to every single unit in an area of the board, which is something other armies just don't really have, except like Inceptors or anything that deep strikes 3 inches away. And that means I just get to kill everything.
That's super powerful. I mean, when you say it, I'm jealous that I'm not playing this army. I'm not even like playing 40k aggressive. This army sounds hella fun. This is really cool.
So, yeah, it's great. A lot of the time, my opponent will do things like move forward a transport and then say, oh, I'll get the guys out behind a wall. So I'll run forward 15 warp spiders, surround their transport, and then shoot their transport to death and kill everybody inside. It's like, nope, nobody lives.
Yeah. So with respect to how this army plays in teams, I imagine this was like an attacker, like choose not to attack indirect or something and then go murder something, or how was this actually used?
Generally, I was fine taking any pairing that wasn't really, really bad for me. There were a couple of pairings I wanted to avoid, like the Plague. The biggest one was Grey Knight Dread Knights. That's all for like 17 different reasons. They have armor contempt on 2-up saves, and I have a lot of AP1. They can teleport and shoot me with flamers that overwatch me, and guns that kill all my jet bikes, and then deep strike 3 inches away. And like that is as close to just like a hardcore, like cannot play as exists in teams. Luckily, it's teams. So I needed to avoid those matchups, which means I was attacking anything I reasonably could attack. And if they didn't have the tools to respond to me, I got to just play single player because I was so fast.
Nice. That's really cool.
And then later on, I could defend, kick back the one thing that I didn't want to play. Usually there was one, and just kick it back and take the other one and then put it on my board. So that guard list I played, I put on my board. And I was like, yeah, you can't really move those tanks around. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
So it was
you, I mean, like you won best general at this team tournament, and also Art of War won the team tournaments. Like you were the strongest player in the room on the strongest team in the room, and that doesn't you haven't really played Eldar All Edition. So, and this is a very different Eldar list than all of the different lists that have been theorized, as far as I can see in terms of Eldar. Not like, as you said, every component has been tried and done before, but combining it in this way and using it in an aggressive approach, I have not seen done in this manner. So how did you just like wake up one day and come up with this list?
I wanted to play Blood Angels to this, because I played Blood Angels the last time, but my good friend Kyle McCord was going and he plays Templars, and I'm like, I'm a flexible guy, that's totally fine. So then I was looking around for different armies I could play. I could play our Grey Knights, but our Grey Knights needed some conversion work to put hammers on the Dread Knights, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. I could play World Eaters, and I do love my World Eaters, but I was kind of just not feeling them at the moment. And so I looked at Harlequins because I wanted to get my Harlequins off the shelf. And when I couldn't find a way to make that army work, it just does too much of nothing. I did really like that one Harlequin unit. So I was like, all right, screw it. We're going to start from the ground up, and we're just going to include this unit and see what I can do. And so that's where I came from. So like I started with that as my baseline of I want to use this unit. What can I build around it? And when you include kind of a weird unit to start, you're going to kind of end up with a weird list.
Yeah, that's very fair. I love that approach to list building too, and I think we can go into a whole episode on that if we wanted, but I want to kind of keep it to where it is. Now you went to this team tournament, right? And this was your first time doing pairings. I know we spent the whole first portion of this episode talking about the list and all that stuff. I just want to talk about like how your experience with the pairings was as well.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I actually like doing the pairings. I also was blessed with a willing first defender every time. John usually does the pairings, or you usually do the pairings, or the two of you together. I help. Like we do pairings, but I decided I wanted to do the pairings, so I asked if I could take lead on pairings, and it was absolutely fine with him. But he plays the way he likes to play his Tyranids in teams. Is he says, I like to be the first one out, and I'll take whatever the team doesn't want to play. Which I'm not going to argue with him if he says that. So with that in the comp, I can just throw him out. He's kind of decent into everything, and he'll take whatever the team doesn't want, and he will, not lose to it generally. And then by doing so, he's pulled out whatever makes the pairings hard for the rest of the team later on. And then it's just about avoiding, the last one or two bad matchups that exist. And that's a lot easier than maybe having a column of matchups that are all bad. John's pulled that one out. We're fine. It's all about avoiding any bad matchups for the last 4 games. That one's a lot easier.
So you're not like, as a team's pairer, you're not trying to aggressively use like a shooting army with the first board choice to maybe table someone. I mean, I don't want to get so deep into teams pairings without having to explain even what it is. Sorry for the listeners here, but basically in teams, you set up matchups, right? One person goes out and gets attacked by another person. So then you don't know what you're going to get attacked by. You got to kind of be ready for anything. It's okay if you have one bad matchup, but not 2, because you get attacked by 2 armies, and then you have to accept one of them. So there's a lot of ins and outs and backs and forths through teams. And it sounds like, Jack, you were playing with a more defensive mindset where you're trying to minimize bad matchups instead of maximize good matchups. So there's very 2 different mindsets. The maximizing good matchups mindset is like, let's put Tau out as our first defender and pick the open table because the defenders get table choice. And then who wants to attack Tau on open tables? You have 2 attackers? No, somebody dies. So is that like how you wanted to approach it, or how like the team philosophically approaches it? Why do you approach it that way? So
I think it's less swingy that way. Let me explain. If we put out Tau on an open board, right, and then if we make that our team comp and they do have 2 answers, oopsie daisy. But that's not even what I'm talking about. It's like if I put out Tau and then they put out somebody and our Tau player murders them, then whatever, usually when you're pairing into a good team, there's one army that is just going to give your team problems, right? In this event, it was the Grey Knights. We didn't have a great answer to Grey Knights. Like Grey Knight, like Dread Knight spam. We didn't have a good answer to it. If we put out a heavy shooting army and they take something and kill it, at some point down the line, that Grey Knight army is going to find somebody they want, and they're going to kill them. So you're kind of trading two matchups that are big for each other. I have faith in my team that if we just don't get any bad matchups, we'll do fine. I trust my team to pull through. And as long as I don't hand them the absolute worst case scenarios, I have faith that they will do well in that game. And I'm not looking to trade one swingy matchup for another. I'm looking to get consistently, like, I want everybody on my team to get like a 12. Maybe one person gets a 10, one person gets set up with an 18, and then you just kind of go.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Part of it is trusting your team and your players. There's a lot of different facets to team play, and like as you said, your approach will put a lot more emphasis on people to just play games of Warhammer with games that are like fine, more or less singles matches where you're just playing who sees better, where the matchup isn't deciding the game outcome. Or you can create a team composition which is like largely skewed, or has many skew lists in it, and then let the player and the position, let the matchup kind of dictate the outcome of the game. I really appreciate the approach you've taken with it. I think that's like my personal favorite approach with teams as well. And it's obviously worked out for you as you guys won, and you got Best General, Jack, which I think is super exciting. I'm really curious to hear more about your list, though. I just wanted to sidebar about the teams for a little bit. But I think the perfect place to do that is in part 2 of this episode. So with that, listeners, I want to thank you, Jack, for coming on to the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, thank you for having me on.
All right, if you want to hear more about this amazing Harlequin Eldari list, if you want to hear about the Avatar and the Harlequin troops, the heroic interventions, the play-by-play and the approach into different armies and matchups, check out patreon.com/AOW40K for part 2. You'll get access to this episode, 240 other episodes, and you'll get access to a Discord server where you can literally ask Jack or myself questions directly. It's going to be wonderful. $5 a month. We'll see you there, folks.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtofWar40K.com.